The HFY research facility on Nexus 7 had been studying the human specimen for 3 years, 7 months, and 14 days. Dr. Velteron made the same notation in his files every morning. Watching through reinforced quantum glass as subject, H001 sat motionless in the corner of her containment cell. She was 12 years old. According to the manifest from the human colony ship they'd intercepted, 12 rotations around whatever primitive star had spawned her species. The HFY Council had been ecstatic. When the acquisition team returned with an actual living human, not the corpses they usually brought back from their pacification raids on outer rim settlements, humans were legends, myths, the species that had somehow carved out territory in the galaxy's most hostile regions, who built cities on planets that would kill most sentient beings within hours, the species that fought with such ferocity that even the mighty Drexkari Empire had classified human space as strategically inadvisable for conquest. But this one looked so small, so fragile. Subject appears dormant. Velteron dictated to his recorder. No aggressive behaviors observed. Appetite remains minimal. Physical development consisted with human juvenile parameters. What he didn't record was the way Subject H1's eyes tracked every HFY researcher who entered her observation area, how she'd memorized their schedules, their movement patterns, their individual sense. He didn't mention that she'd been speaking to herself in what their translators identified as at least 7 different human languages, including several that didn't exist in their databases. Her name was Kira Rathburn, though the HFY would never learn this. Her parents had been archaeologists specializing in pre-space flight human warfare, and they'd filled her childhood with stories of Sparta, of Vikings, of samurai honor and Celtic fury. They taught her that humans were survivors because they were willing to do what others would not. They'd also taught her patience. The HFY facility housed 47 researchers and 63 security personnel. Kira had counted them during meal rotations, cross-referenced their shift patterns, and identified 17 critical system vulnerabilities in the station's design. She'd done this while pretending to be a frightened child, letting them believe their psychological profiles were accurate. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Kira wasn't afraid anymore. She'd moved past fear 3 months ago and now lived in a state of pure, crystalline rage. Today would be different. Today, Velteron would make a mistake that would doom not just his research station, but 3 entire star systems. Beginning today's cognitive assessment, he announced, entering her cell with the confidence of a being who'd never encountered human ingenuity. Married to human wrath, Kira looked up at him with eyes that seemed old for her face. Dr. Velteron, she said in perfect HFY, her accent flawless. I've been waiting for you. The translator embedded in Velteron's skull nearly overloaded, trying to process the emotional undertones in her voice. If it had been more sophisticated, it might have identified them, anticipation, calculation, and something that roughly translated to the joy of impending vengeance. Instead, Velteron simply noted that the subject had finally begun speaking their language. He activated his neural recorder and stepped closer to the small human child, who was about to teach the galaxy why her species had earned their reputation. Fascinating, he murmured, completely unaware that in the next 6 to 7 minutes, Kira Rathburn would escape her cell, seize control of the station's communication array, and broadcast a message that would bring the combined might of humanity's fleet screaming toward HFY space with enough firepower to crack moons. The human child smiled, and Velteron's last coherent thought would be how strange it was that such a small expression could contain so much promised destruction. The cognitive assessment chamber was a sterile white cube designed to monitor and measure the mental acuity of captured specimens. Dr. Velteron had used it successfully on 43 different species over his career. None had ever walked out of it. Kira sat in the center of the room, electrodes attached to her temples, while holographic puzzles materialized around her, standard intelligence metrics for species classification. She solved the first 17 without visible effort, her small fingers dancing through 3-dimensional mathematical proofs that had stumped HFY academics. Remarkable cerebral development, Velteron muttered, his 4 eyes tracking the neural readouts. Subject demonstrates problem-solving capabilities far beyond initial projections. What the readouts couldn't show was that Kira had deliberately failed the first 6 tests during previous sessions, establishing a baseline that made her current performance seem like natural development rather than calculated deception. The HFY believed in gradual learning curves. They'd never evolved the concept of strategic misdirection. Dr. Veltaran, Kira said, her voice carrying a strange harmonic quality. That made the translator struggle. I have a question. The massive insectoid researcher leaned forward, his mandibles clicking with excitement. This was unprecedented. No subject had ever initiated dialogue during assessment. What is your question? Subject H001. Why did you kill my parents? The neural monitor spiked as raw emotion flooded through the electrodes. Veltaran stepped back, alarmed by readings that shouldn't have been possible from such a small organism. Your parents were terminated during standard acquisition protocols, he said clinically. Their biological data was preserved for research purposes. Something changed in Kira's expression. The last traces of childhood innocence vanished, replaced by something ancient and implacable. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that made the chamber's walls vibrate. You preserved their data. Yes, standard procedure for Kira's right hand, still connected to the neural monitoring system. Clenched into a fist, the biometric sensors registered an impossible spike in neurological activity as she channeled 3 years of suppressed grief and rage into a single, focused thought. The holographic control interface shattered. Veltaran stumbled backward as his equipment exploded in showers of sparks. The chamber's walls began to buckle as Kira's neurological emanations interfaced directly with the station's quantum processors. She wasn't just solving the puzzles anymore, she was rewriting them, turning the chamber's own systems against itself. Impossible, Veltaran whispered, his translator finally identifying the harmonic quality in Kira's voice. It was the sound of barely contained nuclear fury given vocal form. Kira stood, electrodes still attached, her small frame somehow seeming to fill the collapsing chamber. You want to study humans, Doctor? Let me teach you something about human nature. The neural feedback loop she created turned the monitoring system into a broadcast antenna. Her thoughts, her memories, her accumulated rage transmitted directly into the station's communication array. Every HFY researcher on Nexus 7 suddenly experienced human grief, human loss, human fury from the inside. 17 of them collapsed immediately, their nervous systems unable to process emotions that intense. The others began screaming in languages they didn't know were cries from a dozen human cultures, battle hymns their translators couldn't decode. Veltaran tried to reach the emergency shutdown, but Kira was faster. Her hand shot out and grabbed his primary manipulator arm, her grip impossibly strong for something so small. The neural connection flowed both ways, and suddenly she was inside his mind, downloading 3 years of research data directly into her own consciousness. She learned about the raids, the systematic extermination of human colonies, the specimens they collected and studied and discarded, the plans for larger strikes against human space. She learned about the 47 research stations, the 63 security. All of it flooded into her 12-year-old mind with crystalline clarity. When Kira released Veltaran, he crumpled to the floor, his 4 eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. She stepped over his body and walked to the chamber's door, which had automatically sealed when the systems overloaded. The lock was quantum encrypted, designed to contain beings far more physically powerful than humans. Kira pressed her palm against it and smiled. The lock screamed as she forced it to recognize her neural pattern as administrative override. The door dissolved. Behind her, the chamber's emergency systems finally triggered, sealing the room in containment foam. It was far too late. Kira Rathburn was loose in the station, carrying in her head the complete operational details of the HFY Research Division. And she was no longer pretending to be just a frightened child. She was a human who had finally remembered what humans were capable of when they stopped holding back. The security alerts began screaming across Nexus 7 exactly 14 minutes after Kira walked out of the assessment chamber. Commander Drexithel had never heard alarms quite like these. The station's AI wasn't just reporting a containment breach. It was broadcasting what sounded like a war song. Status report. He barked into his comm, his scaled hide rippling with tension. Subject H001 has breached level 7 containment. Came the panicked response from Security Chief Nexavara. She's moving toward the data core. We've lost contact with Research Team Delta. Drexithel felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Research Team Delta consisted of 8 HFY specialists and Develkin interrogation experts. They were trained to handle the most dangerous specimens in known space. The Fine lost contact, he said. though part of him already knew the answer. They're singing, sir, in human languages. They won't respond to direct orders, and they're trying to access the armory. The commander's blood ran cold. The HFY had encountered human psychological warfare before their species had a disturbing talent for mental contamination. But this was a 12-year-old juvenile. The psychological profiles indicated she should be docile, traumatized, manageable. Clearly, the profiles were wrong. Kira moved through the station's corridors like a ghost made of concentrated vengeance. The neural link she'd established was still active, broadcasting human memories and emotions to every HFY within range. She could feel their minds breaking under the weight of human experience, their ordered thoughts fragmenting against concepts they'd never evolved to handle: guilt, remorse, the weight of individual moral responsibility. The HFY were a high-minded species. They'd never developed the psychological architecture to handle personal accountability for atrocities. When Kira forced them to experience human grief, human loss, human moral complexity, their minds simply shattered. She found Research Team Delta in the corridor leading to the data core. They were sitting in a circle, holding hands, singing Amazing Grace in perfect English. Their black, multifaceted eyes streamed with tears they didn't understand. Kira knelt beside Dr. Kexthara, the team leader who had performed 17 exploratory procedures on human specimens. She pressed her hand to the HFY's temple, and suddenly Kexthara could see her victims not as research subjects, but as people, as children, as parents and lovers and dreamers. The screaming started immediately. "I'm sorry," Kira whispered, and meant it. She was giving them something their species had never possessed the capacity for genuine remorse. It was a gift that would drive most of them insane. She left them singing funeral dirges and continued toward the data core. The station's automated defenses activated as she approached the restricted levels. Plasma barriers materialized across her path, followed by security drones armed with neural disruptors. Standard containment protocols designed to stop any known species. Kira looked at the barriers and laughed a sound that made the station's walls vibrate with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from human vocal cords. She'd absorbed 3 years of HFY technical specifications from Veltaron's mind. She knew every system, every vulnerability, every elegant shortcut their engineers had built into their impregnable facility. The plasma barriers were keyed to biological signatures. They'd stop any organic being, but Kira wasn't just organic anymore. The neural link had changed her, fused her consciousness with the station's quantum processors. She was part of the network now, part of the system itself. She walked through the barriers like they were water. The security drones opened fire, their neural disruptors calibrated to incapacitate any known species. The energy beams passed harmlessly through her, striking the walls behind her in showers of sparks. "This is Commander Drexel," came the announcement over the station's comm system. "All personnel are ordered to evacuate to minimum safe distance. We are implementing Scorch Protocol." Kira paused in her advance. Scorch Protocol meant they were going to destroy the entire station rather than let her reach the data core. They'd sacrificed 110 personnel to stop one human child. The thought filled her with something beyond rage, a cold, calculating fury that her parents would have recognized. They raised her on stories of human history, of what her species did to those who threatened their young. The HFY were about to learn why humans had carved out territory in the galaxy's most hostile regions. They were about to discover what happened when you gave humans a reason to stop pretending they were civilized. Kira reached the data core just as the station's self-destruct sequence activated. She had 90 seconds before the fusion reactors overloaded and vaporized everything within a 100-kilometer radius. She pressed both palms against the central data console and smiled. 90 seconds was more than enough time to do what she'd come here to do. The signal that burst out from Nexus 7's communication array traveled faster than light, carrying with it everything the HFY had learned about human space. Fleet positions, colony locations, defensive capabilities, population centers. But it also carried something else: the neural pattern of a human child who had been pushed far beyond her breaking point. A child who had absorbed the complete tactical knowledge of her captors. It was now broadcasting it to every human vessel within 1,000 light years. The message was simple, transmitted in 17 different human languages. "This is Kira Rathburn, daughter of Marcus and Eleanor Rathburn, murdered by the HFY Research Division. I am transmitting the complete operational parameters of their fleet. I am at coordinates 347.892. 1156. Come find me. Come show them what humans do to those who experiment on our children. The station exploded exactly 47 seconds later, taking with it 110 HFY personnel and the most advanced research facility in their space. But the message had already been received by the 3rd Human Deep Strike Fleet, currently stationed at the edge of HFY territory. Admiral Kane Murdoch read the transmission twice, his scarred face growing darker with each word. Signal the fleet, he told his communications officer. The 3rd Human Deep Strike Fleet materialized out of hyperspace like a swarm of metallic death. 47 warships, each one built with a single purpose, to project human lethality across impossible distances at the speed of light. Admiral Kane Murdoch stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Inexorable, studying the tactical display that showed the wreckage of Nexus 7. The debris field was still cooling. Radioactive fragments of what had been the HFY's most advanced research facility. Sensor readings confirmed the transmission origin, reported Commander Vexander Torres, his tactical officer. No life signs detected in the debris field. Murdoch's jaw tightened. He'd read Kira Rathburn's file during the hyperspace jump, 12 years old. Parents killed during a HFY specimen acquisition raid. 3 years in captivity while alien scientists performed unspeakable experiments on a human child. Sir, came the voice of Communications Officer Jorik Steelsong. We're receiving multiple distress signals from HFY facilities throughout this sector. They're asking for help. The Admiral's scarred face split into a grin that would have frightened demons. Are they now? Put it on the main display. The holographic projector shimmered to life, showing the desperate face of HFY Fleet Commander Vexcali. His 4 eyes were wide with terror, his mandibles clicking in distress patterns that the computer translated as panic. Unknown human vessels, Vexcali transmitted. We are prepared to negotiate. The research subject has been neutralized. There is no need for further hostilities. Murdoch studied the alien commander for a long moment, his scarred hands clasped behind his back. He'd earned those scars during the Terran Draconian Wars, when humanity had first learned what it meant to fight for survival among the stars. Commander Torres, he said quietly, what is our current tactical assessment? 47 ships versus their estimated defensive fleet of 1,200 vessels, sir. They have us outnumbered roughly 25 to 1. And what does human military doctrine say about engaging when outnumbered? Torres smiled, her augmented neural implants already calculating firing solutions. That we should have brought more enemies, sir. The Admiral nodded. Signal the fleet. Implement protocol. Omega-7. Across the human formation, weapon systems that had been declared too brutal for conventional warfare began powering up. The HFY had made a critical error. In their psychological profiles of humanity, they'd assumed that humans fought like other species, with honor, with rules, with some concept of proportional response. They'd never encountered a species that had refined warfare into an art form. Over millions of years of evolution. Sir, Jorik reported, the HFY commander is requesting a ceasefire. He's offering to return all human prisoners and cease operations in human space. Murdoch's expression didn't change. Commander Torres, have you identified their fleets? Staging area. Yes, sir. HFY Prime. Approximately 60 light minutes from our current position. They're massing everything they have. Looks like they're preparing for a traditional defensive formation. How traditional? They're clustering their ships around their primary shipyards and population centers. Classic shield formation, designed to maximize defensive fire while protecting civilian infrastructure. The Admiral's grin widened. The HFY were still thinking like civilized beings. They were trying to minimize casualties, protect their non-combatants, fight a war with rules and boundaries and concepts of acceptable losses. Humans had abandoned those concepts the day the first alien warship opened fire on a human colony. Signal all ships, Murdoch commanded. We're not engaging their fleet. Torres raised an eyebrow. Sir, we're going to demonstrate what humans do to species that experiment on our children. Set course for every HFY research facility, military, installation, and government complex within jump range. We're going to hit them simultaneously across 47 different star systems. The tactical display updated as human ships began dispersing, each one assigned to a different target. The HFY had concentrated their fleet to defend their homeworld, leaving their extended infrastructure completely vulnerable. It was exactly what Murdoch had hoped they would do, sir, Jorek said, his voice tight with something that might have been excitement or horror. The HFY are broadcasting on all frequencies. They're calling for a diplomatic solution. Put them through. Vexcali's image reappeared, his panic now mixed with desperation. Admiral Murdoch, please, we can resolve this without further bloodshed. The research program has been terminated. We offer full reparations for any. Commander Vexcali, Murdoch interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of human authority across light years of space. You took a human child from her parents. You imprisoned her. You experimented on her. You made the mistake of believing that humans fight like other species. The alien commander's mandibles stopped clicking. Something in Murdoch's tone had finally penetrated his alien psychology. We don't fight to win territory, the admiral continued. We don't fight for resources or political advantage. When you threaten our children, we fight to ensure that your species remembers why that was a mistake for the next 1,000 generations. The transmission cut out. Across 47 star systems, human warships began opening fire on targets that had never expected to see combat. Research stations that had thought themselves safely hidden in deep space. Military installations that had been built to project HFY power into human territory. Government complexes that had authorized the systematic brutalization of human prisoners. All of them began burning at exactly the same moment. The message was clear. Humans didn't just fight their enemies. They fought the entire infrastructure that had made their enemies possible, and they were very, very good at it. The Battle of HFY Prime began at 1347 Standard Galactic Time when the HFY home fleet, realizing that their dispersed installations were being systematically destroyed, abandoned their defensive formation and charged directly at the human vessels. Admiral Murdoch watched from the bridge of the Inexorable as 1,200 alien warships accelerated toward his 47 ships in a formation that spoke of desperation. Rather than tactics, the HFY had finally understood what humans were capable of, and terror had replaced strategy in their decision-making. Enemy fleet closing at maximum burn, reported Commander Torres. They're not maintaining formation discipline. This is going to be a brawl, not a battle. Then let's give them what they're asking for, Murdoch replied. All ships, weapons free. Show them why. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a dying star. HFY plasma cannons, designed to slice through conventional armor plating, struck human ships that had been built using metallurgy techniques learned from fighting in neutron star graveyards. The alien weapons left scars but failed to penetrate. Human return fire was different. The Inexorable's main guns weren't plasma cannons or particle beams. They were kinetic weapons that fired projectiles at 70% the speed of light chunks of depleted uranium that had been blessed by human priests and inscribed with the names of every human child who had died in alien laboratories when they struck the HFY flagship Dominion of Stars. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Direct hit on their command ship, Torres reported, her voice tight with satisfaction. Target destroyed. Enemy fleet is breaking formation, but the HFY weren't retreating. If anything, the destruction of their flagship seemed to have triggered something primal in their high-minded psychology. The remaining ships began attacking with suicidal fury, ramming human vessels when their weapons failed to penetrate. The human frigate Retribution took a HFY cruiser directly amidships, both ships disappearing in a ball of superheated plasma. The destroyer Vengeance found itself surrounded by 17 enemy vessels. It fought until its hull breached and its crew was exposed to vacuum. They kept firing until the last human aboard finally suffocated. We're losing ships, Torres reported, her augmented reflexes tracking dozens of simultaneous engagements. Enemy is accepting catastrophic losses to close to ramming distance. Murdoch nodded grimly. This was what happened when you pushed a species beyond rational thought. They stopped fighting tactically and started fighting existentially. The HFY understood now that this wasn't about territory or resources. This was about extinction. Signal the fleet, he commanded. Implement Protocol Lazarus. Across the human formation, ships that had been taking defensive positions suddenly accelerated directly toward the largest concentrations of enemy vessels. The HFY had expected humans to fight like civilized beings, preserving their own forces while seeking tactical advantage. They'd forgotten that humans had evolved as persistence hunters. When prey became dangerous, humans became more dangerous. The heavy cruiser Thermopylae plunged directly into the center of a HFY battle group. its crew of 300 fighting hand-to-hand in the corridors as enemy boarders swarmed. Through breached sections, Captain Alexander Grimwell detonated his ship's fusion reactor when enemy forces reached the bridge. Taking 47 HFY vessels with him, the battleship Stalingrad found itself facing odds of 60-1 and responded by launching every fighter in its bays while simultaneously ramming the nearest enemy dreadnought. The collision split both ships in half, but the human fighters continued their attack even as they flew through the expanding debris field. "Admiral," came the voice of Lieutenant Kriegsmarine Nightfall from the communication station, "we're receiving surrender requests from multiple enemy vessels." Murdoch's scarred face remained impassive. "Are they the ships that were involved in the research program?" "Yes, sir. Intelligence confirms at least 30% of the enemy fleet participated in operations against human civilians. No quarter," the Admiral said simply. The order transmitted across the human fleet in a burst of tactical data that every ship commander understood. This wasn't about military victory, it was about ensuring that no species would ever again consider human children acceptable test subjects. The battle raged for 6 hours. When it ended, the space around HFY Prime was littered with the wreckage of over 800 ships from both sides. The human fleet had been reduced to 11 vessels, all of them damaged, all of them running on emergency power, but they had accomplished their mission. Of the 1,200 HFY ships that had attacked them, fewer than 50 remained functional. The survivors floated dead in space, their crews either dead or too traumatized to respond to communications. "Damage report," Murdoch ordered, though he could see the tactical display for himself. They traded 36 human ships for over 1,100 alien vessels. In any conventional analysis, it was a crushing victory. In human terms, it was just the beginning. "Sir," Torres reported, "long-range sensors are detecting incoming signals from human space. It looks like the entire home fleet is jumping toward our position." Murdoch smiled. The message that 12-year-old Kira Rathburn had broadcast hadn't just reached the Third Deep Strike Fleet, it had reached every human military installation within 1,000 light-years. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity went to war not for conquest, but for vengeance. And the HFY, huddled in their damaged ships around their burning homeworld, were about to discover that the Battle of HFY Prime had been the gentle opening move in a conflict that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. 3 days after the Battle of HFY Prime, the HFY High Command made a decision that would be studied by military historians for centuries. They activated the Nexus Protocol, hidden deep within their homeworld's crust. The Nexus was a weapon that had been built during their first expansion into space, a planet killer designed to sterilize entire star systems by triggering controlled stellar collapse. It had never been used, never been tested, never been anything more than a theoretical deterrent against extinction-level threats. The arrival of 400 human warships at the edge of their system had convinced them that extinction was exactly what they were facing. Admiral Murdoch received the transmission on the bridge of the heavily damaged Inexorable, surrounded by the combined might of humanity's military response. The home fleet had arrived 6 hours earlier, followed by the Second Deep Strike Fleet, the Colonial Defense Force, and ships from every human military command within jump range. "Admiral," came the voice of HFY Supreme Commander Drexenali, "we are prepared to implement total system sterilization rather than submit to human occupation. Withdraw your forces, or we will trigger a stellar collapse that will destroy everything within 20 light-years." Murdoch studied the tactical display, his scarred face revealing nothing. The Nexus readings were clear. The HFY had somehow destabilized their own star's fusion cycle. In approximately 4 to 7 minutes, HFY Prime's sun would go supernova, taking with it 17 inhabited worlds and the lives of 43 billion beings. "Sir," reported Admiral Alexander Ironwright, commander of the home fleet, "they're not bluffing. Our sensors confirm massive gravitational fluctuations in their star's core. They're actually going to do it." "Of course they are," Murdoch replied quietly. "They're facing extinction. Any species would consider stellar suicide rather than accept total defeat." He paused, studying the data streams that showed human ships scattered throughout the HFY system, 400 vessels, representing the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Over 2 million personnel, all of them within the blast radius of an artificially triggered supernova. "Sir," came the voice of Commander Torres, "recommend immediate withdrawal to minimum safe distance. We can be clear of the blast zone in 38 minutes. Murdoch nodded slowly. It was the tactically sound decision. Let the HFY destroy themselves and their entire civilization rather than risk human lives in a futile rescue attempt. It was also exactly what the negative, he said. Signal all ships. We're going in. The bridge of the inexorable fell silent. Even the background hum of the ship's system seemed to pause as his officers processed what he just ordered. Sir, Admiral Ironwright said carefully, the stellar collapse is irreversible. We cannot stop what they've started. If we attempt a surface assault now, we'll lose every ship and every crew member in this system. I'm not ordering a surface assault, Murdoch replied. I'm ordering a rescue operation. He turned to face his staff, his scarred face illuminated by the tactical displays that showed a dying star. At 43 billion beings who had less than 40 minutes to live, the HFY High Command may have decided to commit species suicide, he said, but that doesn't mean their civilians deserve to die. Signal all ships with cargo capacity. We're conducting the largest evacuation in galactic history. Admiral, Torres protested, even if we could transport 43 billion beings, where will we take them? No human world has the infrastructure to support. We'll figure that out later, Murdoch interrupted. Right now, we have 36 minutes to save as many lives as possible. Move. What followed was organized chaos on a scale that defied description. 400 human warships, designed for combat, suddenly became rescue vessels. Cargo bays were cleared. Passenger compartments were improvised. Environmental systems were pushed far beyond their design limits. The HFY civilians, realizing that the humans were trying to save them, despite everything their governments had done, began surrendering in massive numbers. Transport ships that had been built to carry 1,000 beings suddenly found themselves packed with 10,000 refugees. On the surface of HFY Prime, human Marines established evacuation zones while their ship's transporters worked at maximum capacity. The technology had never been tested on this scale, moving entire populations from planetary surface to orbital vessels in a matter of minutes. 30 minutes to stellar collapse, Torres reported, her voice tight with stress. We've evacuated approximately 6 billion beings. Transporter systems are beginning to fail from overuse. Murdoch watched the tactical display, calculating impossible. Mathematics, 6 billion saved, 37 billion still planet-side. 30 minutes until everyone in the system died, humans and HFY alike. Signal the engineering ships, he ordered. Emergency deployment of industrial transporters. Strip them from mining operations, construction platforms, anything that can move matter from point A to point B, sir, came the voice of Captain Vex Maria Doomfist from the Heavy Transport Liberation. We're receiving a transmission from the HFY Supreme Commander. He's asking us why we're doing this. Murdoch took the communication, his image appearing on screens throughout the human fleet and on the surface of the dying world below. Supreme Commander Drexenali, he said, his voice carrying across light years of space and decades of accumulated hatred. You ask why we're trying to save your people. The alien commander's image flickered with interference from the stellar disruption. His four eyes were wide with something that the translators identified as wonder mixed with confusion. Your species, Murdoch continued, kidnapped our children. You experimented on them. You tortured them in the name of science. By every law of war, by every concept of justice, we would be justified in letting you all burn. He paused, his scarred face reflecting the light of the dying star. But one human child, 12 years old, spent 3 years in your laboratories and somehow retained enough humanity to broadcast your fleet positions instead of just screaming for revenge. She saved millions of lives by giving us tactical intelligence. That ended this war quickly. The stellar collapse alarms began screaming across every ship in the system. 15 minutes. Torres reported. Murdoch's expression didn't change. If a 12-year-old human child can choose mercy over vengeance after what you did to her, then we can choose to save your people despite what you've done to ours. But Admiral, Drexenali whispered, we're enemies. We've been trying to destroy each other. No. Murdoch replied, watching as the last human transport ships pushed their carrying capacity far beyond safety limits. You've been trying to destroy. U.S., we've been trying to survive. He paused as the final evacuation numbers came in. Today, we're trying to save you. The supernova that consumed the HFY system was visible from 17 different star systems. A brief brilliant flare that marked the end of an empire and the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. When the light faded, the human fleet found itself carrying 41 billion HFY refugees, nearly the entire population of a spacefaring civilization, packed into ships that had never been designed for such a task. The logistics were nightmarish, the environmental challenges almost insurmountable, but somehow, impossibly, they were all alive. Admiral Murdoch stood in the observation deck of the Inexorable, looking out at the scattered remains of what had once been 17 worlds. The debris field stretched across millions of kilometers, chunks of planetary matter still glowing with residual heat from the stellar collapse. Final casualty reports, sir, Commander Torres said, approaching with a data pad that contained numbers that would reshape galactic politics. We lost 37 ships during the evacuation, with approximately 4,000 human casualties, HFY losses. We saved 41.3 billion beings. Total population loss estimated at less than 2 billion, Murdoch nodded grimly. In the span of 46 minutes, humanity had conducted the largest rescue operation in recorded history, while simultaneously demonstrating the most devastating military capability any species had ever witnessed. They had saved an entire civilization while proving they could have destroyed it, sir. Torres continued, we're receiving communications from across the galaxy. The Drexkari Empire is requesting immediate diplomatic contact. The Veltaran Confederacy has offered to mediate negotiations. Even the hegemony is asking for a ceasefire. The Admiral wasn't surprised. News of what had happened at HFY Prime was spreading through hyperspace communication networks, faster than their ships could travel. The galaxy's major powers were realizing that humanity wasn't just another territorial species, they were something entirely new. Supreme Commander Drexanali has formally surrendered his government's authority to human jurisdiction. He's asking to speak with you personally. The holographic communication chamber had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate the massive HFY physiology. Drexanali appeared as a flickering blue projection, his 4 eyes filled with something that the translators struggled to identify. Admiral Murdoch, the alien commander said, his voice carrying harmonics of defeat mixed with gratitude. I have spent my career studying warfare, analyzing the tactical capabilities of dozens of species. I have never encountered anything like what your people accomplished. Murdoch studied the defeated commander. You're referring to our military performance? No. Drexanali replied, his mandibles clicking in what the computer identified as wonder. I'm referring to the fact that you saved us, after everything we had done, after we had literally tried to destroy you along with ourselves. You chose to rescue our entire civilization. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Supreme Commander, your people made a mistake. You assumed that because humans are capable of extraordinary violence, we are fundamentally violent. You confused our capacity for brutality with our nature. Then, what is your nature, Admiral? Murdoch smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached his eyes. We're survivors, Commander. We're the species that evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day for millions of years. We learned to fight because we had to. We learned to kill because the alternative was death. He paused, looking out at the refugee ships that carried the remnants of the HFY civilization. But we also learned something else. We learned that survival isn't just about being the strongest or the most violent. It's about being the species that others want to survive alongside. 3 months later, the Treaty of New HFY was signed aboard the human diplomatic vessel Reconciliation. The document established the HFY Protectorate, placing the refugee population under human protection while guaranteeing their cultural autonomy and eventual right to self-governance. More importantly, it established the Kiral Rathburn Accords, a set of galactic laws governing the treatment of prisoners, the conduct of research involving sentient beings, and the protection of children during military conflicts. The document was signed by representatives from 4 to 7 different species, all of whom had witnessed what happened when humans decided that enough was enough. The real ceremony, however, took place on the human colony world of Haven's Rest, where 41 billion HFY refugees were being permanently resettled. The planet had been chosen specifically for its similarity to the HFY homeworld, similar gravity, atmospheric composition, and stellar radiation levels. Admiral Murdoch stood in the planet's capital city, watching as human engineers worked alongside HFY architects to build something that had never existed before. A truly integrated interspecies society. The former enemies were learning to live together, to work together, to build a future that neither species could have imagined alone. Admiral, came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Xenop psychologist who had been studying the integration process. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a figure that made Murdoch's scarred face break into a genuine smile. Kira Rathburn was 15 years old now, taller than she'd been in the holographic records, but her eyes still held that same fierce intelligence that had brought the galaxy to its knees. She'd spent the last 3 years in human space, recovering from her ordeal and working with the military analysts, who were trying to understand how a 12-year-old child had managed to infiltrate and destroy the most secure facility in HFY space. "Hello, Admiral," she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the worst the galaxy could offer and emerged stronger. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For showing them that humans can choose mercy," she replied. "When I was in that laboratory, I used to dream about what would happen when our people found me. I imagined fleets of ships coming to rescue me, or to avenge me, or to make the HFY pay for what they'd done." She paused, looking out at the city where former enemies were learning to be neighbors. "I never imagined they'd come to save everyone." Murdoch nodded slowly. "You gave us the intelligence we needed to end the war quickly. Without your sacrifice, millions more would have died on both sides. That's not why I did it," Kira said firmly. "I did it because I was angry. I wanted them to hurt the way they'd hurt me. And yet you could have broadcast their civilian population centers instead of their military installations. You could have given us targets that would have killed billions of non-combatants." Kira's expression grew thoughtful. "My parents used to tell me stories about human history, about the choices people made when they had the power to destroy their enemies completely. They said that the measure of a civilization wasn't how effectively it could kill, but how it chose to use that power." She looked up at the Admiral, her eyes reflecting the light of Heaven's Rest twin suns. "I think they would have been proud of what you did here." Murdoch felt something tight in his chest loosened for the first time since this whole crisis had begun. "I think they would have been proud of what you did, too." As the two humans stood watching the sunset over a world where former enemies were learning to build a future together, neither of them noticed the small group of HFY children playing in the nearby park. They were laughing, chasing each other in games that had no words in any language, while their parents watched nervously from the sidelines. One of the children, a young HFY named Nexkara, a name that meant brave like the human child in the old tongue, stumbled and scraped her knee on the unfamiliar ground. She began to cry, the sound carrying across the park in harmonics. That made every HFY adult freeze in recognition. But before any of them could react, a human child, roughly the same age, ran over and knelt beside the injured HFY girl. Without hesitation, without fear, without any of the species barriers that had kept their peoples apart for so long, the human child offered her hand to help the alien girl to her feet. The HFY child looked up at the human child's face, saw only kindness and concern, and took the offered hand. They walked back to the playground together, the human child chattering in basic galactic standard, while the HFY child responded in clicking sounds that somehow conveyed perfect understanding. Watching from across the park, Admiral Murdoch realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the burning ships or the tactical superiority or the signed treaties. Victory was two children from different species, learning that they didn't have to be afraid of each other. It was the galaxy's first glimpse of what humanity had always been capable of, not just surviving, but helping others survive alongside them. And in that moment, Murdoch understood that 12-year-old Kira Rathburn hadn't just brought the galaxy to its knees. She'd shown it how to stand back up. Author's note: this story explores the HFY theme that humanity's greatest strength isn't our capacity for violence, but our ability to choose mercy even when vengeance would be justified. The Kira Rathburn Accords mentioned in the story went on to become the foundation for galactic civilization's first universal Bill of Rights, ensuring that no species would ever again face the horrors that had been inflicted on human prisoners of war. The integrated society of Heaven's Rest became a model for interspecies cooperation that would reshape the political landscape